We've got articles about the FDA reducing fast tracking of drugs. Joey, what in the world is going on? What is fast tracking? What is the normal process first?
Yeah, I think that's, I don't want to turn this into, like a PowerPoint on the FDA approval process. But I think, the core thing to get out of the way is the way this is typically done takes like 8 to 10 years.
Right.
That's how long it takes to get, something from whenever the drug is essentially created, by a drug company to approval. And the patent clock is running that whole time. You're probably happy if you're at 8, you're probably most likely at 10.
Okay.
So that involves...
And that's not research beforehand, developing the drug. That's once you've developed it, you go, hey, this is a really good drug for blood pressure. We're going to apply for the FDA patent and approval. Now the clock is running and you got about 8 years theoretically minimum to get that out. Okay.
So you've got like a preclinical stage where this is where the researchers are performing, the lab testing, et cetera, sometimes on animals, gathering as much information as they can. Then you've got the clinical development stage. So that means when you start moving over to humans.
Right.
Okay. Then you've got the 4 phases of trials.
Oh, wow.
So, and each of these is a couple years, typically, and then it varies. Phase 1, small group of volunteers. Phase 2 is if it's shown to be safe, then you move into more of that demographic that needs the drug. Because at first you're really just testing for safety initially. You don't, if it's a cancer drug, you don't need these people to have cancer at phase 1. You're really testing for just like safety.
It's not going to create cancer.
Right. Yeah. And then, phase 3, it just grows. You just give it to more people.
Yeah.
And phase 4 is monitoring. So again, that clock is ticking. During that time, patents are 20 years. So also FDA is looking at your manufacturing. They're going through everything they can to approve this drug. So what fast tracking does, and we can break that out a little bit. There's really 4 different kinds, and this somehow doesn't even include emergency use authorization, which is
really
separate.
Oh my gosh.
4 different kinds. You've got fast track, you've got breakthrough therapy, you have accelerated approval, and you have priority review. So again, I don't want to go deep into these, but fast track is typically whenever there's an unmet need. So that's why fast track, is critical, because you're talking about things that essentially do not have, any current therapy. But the danger of it is you're often using preliminary non-clinical information to get this ball rolling. So there's risk there in terms of what you are utilizing to get this medication going. So in 2021, 18 of 50 drugs that were approved were fast tracked. In 2020, 17 out of 53. So and these are for serious conditions, which is obviously very subjective. But you're looking for things that are treatments. I mean, you're looking for conditions that are based on survival, day-to-day functioning. You're not going to fast track. Well, I guess you could. Depression is on there. That's a bad example.
Okay.
But you're not going to fast track, some new
hangnail medication.
I was looking for a better example, but you're going to fast track serious stuff.
Okay.
Maybe not you're not going to fast track a blood pressure medication at this stage.
Which is because there's already effective, shown to be effective and safe treatments for blood pressure.
Yes.
And
so you're going to AIDS, Alzheimer's, epilepsy, depression, diabetes, things where people are not getting needs met.
AIDS may be a good example just because it's, a couple decades in the rearview mirror at this point. There are effective treatments on the market, but 1988, 1993, 1997, it was still a significant problem with terminal consequences. So you would fast track a drug because for those people who have that and are dealing with it, I'm willing to take an experimental drug if it means I might get to live a little longer.
Yes.
Is that the idea?
Yes. And so here's Here's then just a couple caveats to that. So they go so fast, so to say, that then they are expected to conduct their own follow-up studies.
Okay.
To be determined by the FDA.
Okay.
So it's individualized. They continue to monitor the basic approval standards that the FDA has, safety, efficacy, all those things.
Sure.
So the drug company is expected to do that, which you can kind of guess how often that can go.
That's the point of what's happening right now, isn't it?
Yes. So the issues come in with the drug companies don't do the testing, or they drag their feet. There are examples of where they've pulled it. Blenrep is a GSK drug for blood cancer, myeloma, and it was fast tracked as it was used when other therapies had failed, and they pulled it off the market in 2016. It had a novel mechanism of action, because that's a big thing to also whenever they fast track drugs, and that's critical because. Yes, you want new mechanisms of action out there. That's like the breakthrough drug, new mechanism of action. But that's also the scariest because it's a new mechanism of action in the body. So that's a constant.
So when they pull it, you're talking about a drug that they fast track. It got the fast track approval. It's out in the world. People are taking the drug, and then they remove it from the market. Now, is that typically because they discover that it's not actually safe, or they discover it's not actually effective, or is it just the?
It's mixed. It's usually not effective, but definitely has the.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
It's not effective.
It's kind of an aside to that. For whatever reason, I focused on just more down the path of the accelerated approval. Specifically, it seemed like for whatever reason that was just easy to find. Right?
It's a big. That's a huge.
It's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
The ones there was a study that looked at all the drugs that were accelerated. So again, like Joey said, that's just one component of all the 4 that the FDA, of all their criteria.
Right.
In the accelerated approval, there were none that were actually pulled because of a major safety issue, I believe. Right?
I did not see any with safety.
So that was from, I would say, the years of 1992 to 2018, which is still a good sign. There wasn't something pulled that from the accelerated track specifically that led to a direct mortality sort of thing or whatever.
Right.
So they're pulling stuff mainly because of the lack of efficacy.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. And what's interesting about the accelerated, I kind of have that listed as number 3, but what's interesting about the accelerated approval is they don't say it directly, but it appears that these are studied a little longer, and that could be why.
Yeah.
And because it's really interesting, they're looking at surrogate endpoints.
Yeah.
So
what does that
sometimes
mean?
this is even like where Dante and I will even disagree on certain things. Like a surrogate endpoint is where, like, instead of looking at does this cancer drug make a person live longer, they're saying does the tumor shrink?
Or is there like a blood marker? Is there
Yes.
some sort of like something that would potentially project the clinical endpoint?
Okay, so there,
Yes.
so it's kind of a it's a smaller milestone that they're looking for,
exactly.
specific result.
Yes, and then it gets very gray because cholesterol has typically been accepted, I think at this point, as a surrogate endpoint that you can roll with, so to say.
Okay.
That if it's lowering cholesterol, you're good to go.
Yep.
But they're even finding that shrinking of tumor is technically and clinically not necessarily a endpoint. It's a surrogate endpoint, but it's not an endpoint with meaning.
Presumably because it can still metastasize, or
Yeah,
it can.
you can.
Yeah,
is
you're
it
still
extending?
sick.
Does this show that there's life extension with this treatment, which ultimately you want? And there's other things, quality of life. There's a million other ultimate endpoints,
Right.
But does a tumor shrink in this constrained time period doesn't necessarily equal this person lived for a median 5-year survival longer
Wow.
or whatever.
Right.
So I mean that's a huge theme across healthcare altogether and research altogether. You look at even things that are mechanistic studies, and I think that's kind of partially what Joey was saying as well, is you see something in a mechanistic study, a petri dish study, so to speak, that looks really good and it makes tons of logical sense, but you can't necessarily extrapolate that to living longer. My waist shrunk. I'm stronger.
Right.
whatever. There's more, kind of glaring.
And sometimes that's like, not to like change gears, but sometimes that's what becomes difficult with supplements.
Yeah.
And what I've talked about, he and I, is that it's hard to get as quality of life study and a length of life study on CoQ10.
Right.
So how comfortable are you rolling with the surrogate endpoint, so to say, on some of the things in a supplement or things like that, because we don't have these types of of cash and testing at our whim. So
and that's some of what's being discovered, and what the FDA is pulling back on is that the surrogate endpoints aren't proving to be truly demonstrative of longer life or better outcomes or what have you,
potentially.
And so that's why they're going, we've done the additional study, or we haven't.
Yeah.
We've done the additional study. It's not working like it should be, so we're pulling it off the market.
Yeah.
So what are they changing? I mean, is that what's happening? Are they just going to be stricter about these studies?
It depends too. When I read the article, they are sticking to the term fast track, but I just thought it was very important to go in to the few different types. If we're already going to talk about this, to go into the few different types, because there are nuances to them.
Right.
Fast track is, again, the typically a new mechanism of action, and is typically something that does not have other treatments available for it.
Right.
So they could be using fast track as a broad term, because that's, term, but it technically was under the breakthrough. So for example, breakthrough therapy is second on my list of 4.
Yeah.
And that one is that based on clinical data, you're showing significant endpoint improvement over current therapies. So this one, there's other drugs out there, but this one is better, and we've got to get this out there.
Yeah.
Breakthrough therapy is a big one. I mean, the term they're giving, it's big. It's had a few examples. Lartruvo was withdrawn from the market in 2016. The aftermarket double-blind study, no life expectancy benefit. Cancer drug, none. Carbomedics, still on the market, still has shown only surrogate endpoints and not able to demonstrate quality of life benefit or life expectancy improvements. I don't know how much it's used, but it's still on the market at a cost of $170,000 per year.
Oh my gosh.
Some of them, cancer drugs, because that's what a lot of these are,
right,
have been shown to actually lower quality of life.
Yeah.
On different markers. Then in this accelerated approval, quickly, a big one just to hit on is the Aduhelm for Alzheimer's. That was supposed to be that big cure for Alzheimer's. It was because in PET scans, they saw some benefit. Surrogate endpoint.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then it's $56,000 a year. They couldn't find clinical benefit. And that doesn't include the $2,500 to $7,500 PET scan you have to get before, and then yearly, once or twice yearly after that. And again, only helped the endpoints. The surrogate endpoint did not help actual endpoints of cognitively, how are these people feeling?
Right. Alzheimer's is a good example, because if you come up with the drug that's going to end that, I want you, as somebody, I literally just was at a funeral for my uncle who died of Alzheimer's. I want that drug on the market today.
Right.
I want that. And so I want there to be some sort of fast track approval, because if he had just been diagnosed today and the drug is discovered today, and you're telling me, well, best case scenario, 8 years from now, realistically, is when he might be able to get it. Like, that's not going to help me or him.
That's why so many of these things are nuanced, and it's really tough. You can sit here and slam the FDA and slam all this and slam all that. But that's why I think that it is important to go into some of these details of what they do, why they do it, and, because it's not that simple.
Yeah. Gosh.
That's a really interesting point that was even highlighted in the earlier study that I mentioned, which I do want to add.
Yeah.
Even though there were no safety-related withdrawals, there were still multiple boxed warnings that were added. So meaning after the drug was eventually made it through, let's say, accelerated approval, got regular approval, then they determined, hey, there was significant damage to the kidney potentially, or elevated liver enzymes, whatever. They slapped a boxed warning on there. So it wasn't all perfect.
Right.
So the other layer to that is, in a more like humanistic perspective, they talked about, okay, so people hear about these medications that are being developed. They're in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Is this a potential Alzheimer's treatment option? I don't want my loved one to not have the opportunity to get this. It's also like, what about the idea of, false hope?
Yeah.
That's going out there. It's false hope. And these drugs are $50,000 a year. It's $100,000 a year. Like Joey said, this is so incredibly nuanced. Like,
Yeah.
what do you actually do?
But quickly, with the Aduhelm, I just wanted to tie in one other thing.
Yeah.
So what they were doing, because Dante was bringing up, what's the end game with some of this? What they're doing with that is it's CMS right now. Is only going to allow it to be in trials. So they're basically
CMS is the drug manufacturer.
CMS is Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. So
Okay.
Medicaid and Medicare is primarily a Medicare issue, but they blend.
Sure.
Is going to, because the drug has been approved, they're not going to pay for it at your local pharmacy, but they are going to pay for it in certain randomized controlled trials, so that they can continue to, because it's at some point payers do end up calling some level of the shots about what they're going to end up paying for,
right?
Based on its effectiveness. So that is kind of ongoing. So it doesn't seem like there's a lot of hope, because even when they were approving this, FDA's there's different committees which handle different types of. So it's not just FDA looks at every kind of drug. They have subcommittees that look at certain types.
Right.
Okay. So this one's the FDA's Peripheral and Central Nervous System Advisory Committee. 3 members resigned in protest.
Oh, wow.
During the approval process, and it was rejected in Europe. So when you look at, I know this is a big one and keep harping on, but it was in the news big time. And I think when you add its effect, when you add in its need,
yep,
you add in how debilitating it is for people, you add in the cost, it's just, and then you add in all the controversy. It's like the poster child for the problem with this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So then they do something else, kind of, I don't want to keep harping on it, but priority review is number 4.
Okay.
And priority review is just like it sounds. Basically, you've essentially done all the stuff that everybody else has done, but in a normal drug process approval is done.
Sure.
But you get kind of designated that you will have your application reviewed in 6 months versus 10 months. So this is just a good old, just moving to the front of the line.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So this one, they really don't see any problem with. I'm glad something like this exists.
Yeah.
And the other thing they do is, which I thought was interesting, and this is just like a dovetail, but priority review vouchers. So in that priority review program, if you are making a drug that's related to certain tropical diseases, certain childhood diseases, basically extremely rare diseases that nobody wants to make a drug for because nobody can make money off of them. If you make a drug like that and it gets approved and it's effective, you may not have a blockbuster drug in the pipeline that needs a priority review voucher, but they give you the priority review voucher and you can sell it.
Oh, wow.
So I thought that was really cool. So
Yeah.
so it's an incentive for companies to make these, they call them like orphan drugs, to make these drugs that they know they're not going to be big. They said that a priority review voucher can be worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
That's amazing.
To get
So
something to...
It can facilitate the production of some other drugs or something else. That's really cool.
And that just comes down to cash. If you've got, because a blockbuster drug typically is going to be, a med for AFib nowadays, med for breathing, it's going to be something like that, diabetes.
Yep.
So if you get one of those, on the market that much sooner, that's where the money comes in. You could sell it. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then the last thing is in its own category, and I think it must be said because of COVID times, is emergency use authorization.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how much information you found on it, but it just kind of seems like they can kind of flick a switch on that whenever they want it. Hydroxychloroquine, I mean, they had data on that. They turned it on, and it was got the EUA, and then they turned it off. Now things that are a little more serious, like the shots, they follow you for 2 months versus the standard 6 months. They don't really go into your facility as much as they nearly would during other parts of the process. I mean, it definitely becomes a lot of subjective.
Okay, so you're saying the emergency use authorization is literally emergency, like if there's, I don't know, a global pandemic.
Yeah, it started around anthrax. Let me cut you off, but I think it's important. I missed.
Yeah.
It started around the anthrax scares in 2004. That's why this is this is the newest to get. 2004, anthrax, bird flu, swine flu. They just had to have something that was a bazooka that they could put out there and say this can be a vaccine or drug. Sorry, but go ahead.
No,
but
no,
that was critical. Yeah.
So that's they don't do hardly any long-term. There is no long-term study. There is none of that stuff. It's just, this is a really, really big problem right now, so we're willing to roll the dice on this and hope for the best.
Yeah, we'll watch it for 2 months, and we'll cross our fingers that we can gather enough data in those 2 months.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it is wild. I mean, and it's no wonder why people get uncomfortable. It's an
Absolutely.
uncomfortable conversation. But I just think that, in news articles and these discussions, as long as we, try to highlight certain things that a study did well, or certain things that a study didn't do well, or certain things that the FDA has in place that should help kind of reassure people. You know what I mean? It's not, it's uncomfortable to hear. The COVID vaccine, for example, it's just it's the age old question at this point. There's no long-term studies. Well, no crap. We get that, but as long as people start to understand why these things are in place, the different levels that are there, the demands of like the post-approval trials that are in place, not that they're always done perfectly, they're there. And you just hope that eventually there's more of like a collaborative effort between the drug manufacturers and the FDA that help to kind of get things going. Because when you're the drug manufacturer, you came up with this great drug, you've spent all this money, and then let's say you make it to the accelerated approval process, and then you get just slapped with this. You got to have this, and this in your clinical trial, or else we're pulling it in a year. You're like, well, the heck with you. Like, no wonder there's so much strife between the two. It's that you hope that there's in a perfect world, in a vacuum, that they can work together better, because that's the only way that this stuff ever makes it to market and stays in market. I don't know.
Yeah, and work together
in a dream, maybe, but
and work together in a way that doesn't involve kickbacks and finances of things.
Yeah, it's twisted.
Yeah. So, any practical takeaways? Anything that listeners should be aware of, like when they're being prescribed a drug, they need to be careful that it's not a fast track drug, or that it's okay if it's fast.
At least all this stuff is on the FDA's website. So the accelerated track, for example, if you just Google accelerated approved drugs, there's a list of like 260 or 300 on there that if you were curious, they're on there. And they're not all drugs. It's 268 or 278 indications for medications. So it's out there.
Yeah. So you can search for, if you get prescribed something and you're not familiar with it, you can search for it and know, and then you just ask questions. Yeah, and like Joey said, most of these are oncology medications, or a high percentage of them are. Yep. There are some others, anti-infectives and such, but HIV drugs, AIDS medications, oncology treatments and such.
Most of the time, vast majority of the time, thank God, you're going to know you're in a position to need a fast track drug, God forbid. Right. But it's still worth asking questions if you're being put on something that's rarely used, that your doctor describes as novel, because there are other examples. And again, I don't want to keep going down. We could do this for a while, but there is a big, article that I have here regarding, medication that was used for Parkinson's psychosis that was pulled off this very expensive. It was no good real endpoints, just some surrogate endpoints. It was making some people worse, those kinds of things. Wow. Then there are other ones, Uloric, that was used for gout. There are other good drugs are out there for gout. This one managed to kick and scream and stay out there on the market, despite the fact it was causing cardiovascular disease for a much higher percentage of people that were taking that versus allopurinol, a different one that's more commonly used for gout. So there's still stuff out there, believe me. And again, so I don't want to sugarcoat issues like this either. But in general, the takeaway is if you're going to be on the average drug that you're going to walk in and get is not going to be fast tracked. And if it was fast tracked a while ago, and it's become common therapy. And if it is, it's, God forbid, cancer. It's very serious. Right. If you start getting into some of the more the wackier stuff, the doctors will kind of mention, or really expensive stuff, then sure, maybe you want to ask in that case.